On November 9th, Pfizer announced through a press release that their early data for the COVID vaccine was revealing that it was more than 90% effective. Just 3 days later, Moderna released a press release as well, saying that their vaccine was 94.5% effective. Today, we'll be discussing the pros and the cons of the COVID vaccines, as well as performing a statistical analysis of the data provided at the press release. So looking at our pros, assuming safe and effective, there's really no reason safe and effective for all of us not to get it, right? We're not going to get someone sick. We're not going to get ourselves sick. Potential to return to normal life sooner. There's talks of potential stimulus checks in order to motivate people to go get it. Some companies may require you to have it. There's also various companies talking about travel and social restrictions, talking about United, some other things that mentioned they may require some sort of vaccine card. Same thing as Ticketmaster for your events. You may even have some friends and family that will say, I don't want to hang out with you if you haven't had the shot. Now we'll look at our con list. And for the cons here, we'll have to look at, well, what are the potential side effects in the short term? So we'll talk about that. Long-term safety, really, we don't know any of this at this point in time. We're all looking at short-term studies at this point in time. Many of us are actually already immune, which we'll discuss. If we look at all-cause mortality rates in 2020 and compare it to past years, even though we've had a bunch of COVID deaths, overall our all-cause mortality is actually relatively similar. The other thing we really have to consider is financial incentives. You know, if you're looking at vaccinating 7 billion people, we're talking about a race to make trillions of dollars for these companies. This is something we can't be ignored as well. We're going to discuss effectiveness. We're going to discuss how it was measured in the studies. We're going to look at the study groups using these trials. We're also going to look at how long this might be effective against COVID. So first, we're going to look at our short-term side effects. As many of you know, last week, they started Operation Vaccination in Great Britain. Just after 1 day, Pfizer warned, if you have severe allergies or history of severe allergies, do not get the vaccine. What we're seeing most commonly so far is we're seeing a lot of chills, fever, body aches, and headaches. There's several reports that people are quite sick for 3 days. So what's going on here in America, and actually in Aurora as well, I have some patients that are nurses and doctors at the Medical Center Aurora, and these hospitals are discussing staggering when their various medical professionals get vaccinated so that not everyone's out sick at the same time, because you can't show up to the ER and not have any doctors and nurses, right? Because they're all perhaps homesick from potential side effects from the vaccine. There's actually some proposed legislation for paid sick leave for these people as well. And then there's a lot of concerns that because of some of these side effects, that people aren't going to show up for their second dose. So far, we've found 2 cases. There's been 2 cases noted of transverse myelitis, which is inflammation in your spinal cord and infection in the spinal cord. Several cases of Bell's palsy, which is some face drooping. And then, you know, probably a lot we haven't heard about at this point, and we'll hear later, and undocumented as well. Now, long-term side effects. We don't know. These are 2.5-year studies, and the last dose given in these Pfizer and Moderna studies was given somewhere just between 1 to 2 months ago. So we really don't know long-term effects. We don't even know how long it's effective for at this point in time. A lot of people are concerned about potential autoimmune concerns with these. This is hypothetical at this point because we don't know, but because it is an mRNA vaccine, it's not something that's been regularly used yet at this point. There's some concern that it might cause some autoimmunity down the future for people and cause autoimmune diseases, and might really be bad for people that already have autoimmune. And really, when we look at vaccine history, throughout history, it's taken about 8 to 20 years to produce a vaccine. Now, I mentioned in one of the cons that many of us are already immune. This is something that hasn't really been covered much, so not people are aware of, but there's about 8 studies listed here that actually, if you've had a common cold in the past couple of years, you might have immunity to COVID. Many of the common cold viruses are also coronaviruses. I'm sure you've heard that coronaviruses have been around for a long, long time, but some of these common cold coronaviruses are actually very, very similar in structure to the SARS-CoV-2. So we're seeing there's some cross-reactivity, meaning that your cells, these memory T cells, are developing some immunity. Even if you haven't been exposed to SARS-CoV, you can have some immunity to this. The best examples I can give for this is maybe you had a friend that's in terrible health and they got it and they had no symptoms, or a mild case, or in the summer, there was reports of there's this meat packing plant in Missouri where all 300 workers tested positive and none of them had any symptoms. And what probably most likely happened is that whole meatpacking plant had the same common cold went around the year before. And this gives them, because these are kind of similar in structure viruses, it gave them a little bit of immunity. And what we're seeing actually is in these different studies is they estimate anywhere from 28 to 50% of the population might have some sort of immunity already to COVID without being exposed to COVID, just from cross-reactivity from the common cold viruses. And then also many people have actually already gotten it. So if you look up numbers right now, they're saying 16.5 million people reported cases in the US. I've had it myself, many of my family, I've had patients, I have friends. So there's a lot of people that have already had it as well. And what we're seeing here is there's estimates anywhere from 15 up to 40% of the population, because there wasn't regular testing early on. Obviously, not everyone goes and gets tested. Some people have no symptoms. So these are all various different estimates. Now, why this is important is because if you do get something naturally, like the best example I can give is if you got chickenpox as a kid, the actual way, it gives you immunity usually for your whole life. There will be a few stories where someone gets chickenpox twice, or you'll hear on the news maybe somebody got COVID twice, but these are very, very rare. We're talking about over 100 million people worldwide that have had this, and a few people got it twice. You're looking at 1 in a million. So it's just not how your immune system works. So when you get exposed to something, you develop memory T cells, and these memory T cells should last for a lifetime and be able to fight off these diseases. Below here, I've mentioned, if people remember SARS virus in 2003, they did some studies in 2020 this year, and people that had it in 2003 are still immune to it in 2020. So the experts are predicting that if you've had this, you're probably going to have immunity for a long time, if not your whole life, and it wouldn't be necessary for that type of population to get the vaccine. Another thing to note too, because we have all these people that have had it, we also have all these people that potentially might be immune through a common cold virus that they've had, we look at these estimates come March-ish, when the vaccine should be in general use for the public, the epidemiologists are suggesting that we might be near herd immunity at that point already. So we're going to kind of start to see a pretty large decline at that time anyways. It's keep in mind cold and flu seasons ending around then as well. So, things are going to start going down whether the vaccine shows up then or not. Effectiveness. So what we've talked about is in these press releases, they declared a certain number of effectiveness. There's actually no research right now on any of these vaccines because the research is ongoing. So all we have is press releases where they release some sort of their data, the small amounts of data they have right now. What they don't say in the data is anything about the cases and their trials. So we need to know, are these cases people that have no symptoms? Are they cases that were they hospitalized? Did they die? Because really what's most important when we're looking at this vaccine is, can we prevent deaths and can we prevent hospitalizations? Because preventing asymptomatic cases isn't incredibly important. And there's also no indication at this time, because like I said, these studies are very early on. We don't know how long this will last. We don't know even if it's effective, and we don't know how long it'll protect us for. So a lot of the vaccine experts right now are saying we might have to take this every 3 to 6 months, and that'd be 2 shots every 3 to 6 months in order for this vaccine to work. All right, so this is before we discuss numbers, it's super important in statistics and in evaluating scientific literature that everyone understands the difference between relative and absolute risk. Bear with me, it could be a little confusing. It's a bunch of numbers, but normally when you hear something on the news or from a friend or a journal article, they're usually reporting relative risk because it sounds really, really good and exciting. But 99 times out of 100, what you need to be looking at in a study is absolute risk. And absolute risk is absolutely what we need to be looking at in these studies as well. So I'm going to explain the two using a study that was done years ago. This was a 2,000 person study, and we had 1,000 people in a group that ate breakfast and 1,000 people in another group that didn't eat breakfast. And we were looking at heart disease. And the group that didn't eat breakfast, there was 7 deaths. And the group that did eat breakfast, there was 6 deaths. So if we do 6 divided by 1,000, that gives us our ratio of each group of heart disease. When we look at relative risk is a ratio of one risk to the other. So we just divide the two. And what that gives us when we plug that into a relative risk calculation is a 14% increased chance of dying from heart disease if you don't eat breakfast. Now, if we plug that into the absolute risk, which is what they should really be important in this study, we will see, because it was just a difference of one person out of 1,000, right? That there's a 0.09% increased risk. So this is statistically insignificant and means nothing. So this breakfast study they did is worthless, and they didn't prove or not prove that skipping breakfast had any effect on it at all. So we're going to talk about how they calculated effectiveness in this Pfizer study. So this Pfizer study has over 43,000 participants. Just for ease of numbers today, we're going to call it 40. This won't change any of the numbers we come up with very much. So we're going to call it 40. So out of these 40,000 participants, we had 94 of them that were PCR positive for having COVID, and 86 of those were in the control group, and 94 of these were in the vaccine group. So all the data they have right now, they're only looking at 94 people out of that 40,000 plus study. So you can see how this is kind of flawed at the beginning right now. Like I said, these studies are in the beginning, so the statistics right now aren't very meaningful, and it's very misleading to report these relative risk data. Right here is just a screenshot I took off of Pfizer's website. You can go to their website, you can read through all their statistical methods, you can read through their materials and how they're performing this study. On this page 15 here, it tells us how they calculate vaccine efficiency. This is a relative risk calculation. So they used vaccine efficiency equals 100, 1 minus your relative risk. So we're going to take those numbers they gave us. This is all in the press release. You can see I'm using their exact numbers from the press release, other than we changed it to 20,000 for easiness of following this here today. So when we divide it in each group, we get our COVID attack rate in each group. So in our control group, it's 0.0043, very, 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 very small, right? Too small to have any significance at this point in time in the study. We have 0.0004 in the vaccinated group. To calculate our relative risk, we divide those together. We're dividing one group by the other group, which gives us 0.03. We can plug it into the equation they gave us directly from their website and from their materials and methods section, and that gives us our 90% vaccine effectiveness. Now, what happens if we plug it into what we should have done, which is absolute risk? So we'll go to the next slide. And an absolute risk, like I said, which is a way we should 99 times out of 100, and especially with these types of studies, this is what's important. Like I said, if anyone ever spats off some study you see on the news, always ask the question, are we talking relative risk or absolute risk? They probably don't know most of the time, but usually they're talking relative risk. We need to know absolute risk. So when we subtract these two, we get 0.39% or roughly 0.4% risk reduction. So what this means is if you get the vaccine, you only have a 0.4% risk chance, 0.4% decrease in risk of getting COVID, according to the numbers they've given us at this point in time. So this is very, very bad. Like I said, this could change. This is just early data, and it's not enough cases in their subject right now to determine if this is right or wrong. But if we're going to use their data like they did to present it to us, we need to present the absolute risk, and that's what it is at this point in time. Now, when evaluating vaccination studies, the most important thing we want to look at is the number needed to vaccinate. So this is going to tell us how many people we physically had to, can we go back a slide? So this is going to tell us how many people need to get the shot, in order to prevent one case. So a really strong vaccination study usually is going to have like 14, 16 number needed to vaccinate. It's going to be pretty low, which means you vaccinate 14 people, you prevent one case of, flu or one case of measles or something like that. When we take the numbers they provided for us in the press release, like I said, you can take some of these numbers from the press release and you do the exact calculations I did and you'll come up with the same numbers. But we do 1 divided by that 0.0039 and we get 256. So in order to, according to the numbers they've given us right now, if we want to prevent a case of COVID, we need to have 256 people get vaccinated, and of which you're putting these other 255 people potentially at risk for any of the side effects that we don't know about yet, but they could happen. This is the link here. If you guys want to, you can go to Pfizer's website and find it, or you can use this link to get to their materials and methods section. Now, next question is, what's the study group using these trials? So every vaccine trial, you're going to have to use healthy individuals. You don't want to start shooting things into people that are unhealthy. So currently, the only people that have been tested on these things are the healthy individuals. You can see 60% in our Pfizer studies, 12 to 55, 40% is 55 or older. They don't mention, I could not find, what's the average age of this 55 or older. Very important to know, as big difference between 55 and 85-year-olds. And as we know with COVID is the worst on people that are obese, hypertensive, diabetic, and elderly. This is not population, it has not been tested on them. And we mentioned in our last speech, we talked a little bit about this, that when we look at research on obese people, that often the vaccines are often ineffective because of their excess adipose tissue and their blunted human kind of immune response. So something to note as well, that it may not be effective on the population that needs it the most. And when we look at conventional flu vaccines, these often don't work on the elderly as well. This is why if you've watched TV recently, you'll see a commercial and there'll be a specific flu vaccine for the elderly, because they're trying to get one that works for the elderly, because the conventional one the average person has been shown to be ineffective. So what's the best vaccine, right? That's the next question. We get back to our talk we had last time. It's fresh air, it's sunlight, it's outdoor activities, it's having good relationship. We're all stressed, we know that, right? But you need to be able to manage that stress. We need to exercise, we need food, we need herbs, we need supplements, we need good sleep, right? Guess what the side effects of this best vaccine are? You'll feel better, you'll look better, you'll fit better in your pants, right? You'll have more energy, you're gonna love life. There isn't any side effects, right? So if you think that a magic pill or a drug or even a vaccine is going to replace or make up for any of these things on the list, you're wrong. They might be helpful, and maybe it could prevent you from having a heart attack or prevent you from getting a COVID, a drug or a vaccine, but it's not going to save you from all the other things you're at risk for as well. We need to have this core here to protect us. We talked last time about foods that boost the immune system. You need to be shopping on the outskirts of the grocery store, right? The fruit, organic fruits, the veggies, the nuts, the seeds, pasture-raised meats, wild fish, extra herbs and spices. We talked briefly on this one last time too. I highlighted here liposomal vitamin C and vitamin D. The reason I highlighted these is because every day I'm seeing more and more research on COVID, and that these things are preventing severe cases, they're preventing deaths. We'll go to the next slide here. I've had 5 different studies that we're listing on this slide and the next slide, where what they're saying is, in summary, if your vitamin D level is below 20, your risk for hospitalizations and death are very high. If it's in a normal range of 40 to 60, your risk is very, very low. Americans love magic pills, magic drugs, magic supplement. If there was one magic supplement, I would call it vitamin D. This has been proven to be effective so far. But like I said, there is no magic pill. Vitamin D alone might help you, but you need to combine the other things as well. And these are 2 more studies on the next slide. We'll go ahead and skip to the end. In conclusion, health is not something that can be given to you by someone else. Only you are responsible for your health. I can assure you, if you build a strong immune system with the things nature has provided us, you can drastically decrease your chances of any disease and any cancer, as well as decrease the chances of getting others sick. There's a lot of money in sickness and treating sick people, and a lot of financial incentives in sickness. There is not in health. There's not a lot of money in health. Let's put the focus back on health.